who's more used to Excel and more comfortable in Excel than they are with Minotaur, or perhaps you might have sales people that you want to send some data to so that they can look at it and slice and dice it in a variety of ways, but who you don't want to give access to the Minotaur system to. So we have some of those as well. So the report that's any column type report in Minotaur, as you know, you can press the Excel button and it will come to Excel. Some reports have been optimized for creating for Excel use, and by optimized, what that means is that if there's reports with the little dashes underneath, like the column headings, which, as Roger says, we're working towards getting away from and getting different formatting going, then those little dashy those rows have to be deleted when you go into Excel. So some reports are fully optimized, and this particular report that that we're looking at today is the customer item profitability report, my favorite report, and it's and the reason it's my favorite is because you can run it. It has the unformatted output checkbox, which I think Wendy pointed out this morning. If you check the unformatted output checkbox, and there is a complete, detailed step-by-step guide in your booklets today, so that I think I've taken you right through every step, so that you can just look up here. You don't have to try and write it down or anything like that. Customer item profitability report, when run at the line item detail level, gives you every line item of every invoice for every customer for the date range that you selected. It gives you the cost of those particular items for that customer and the margin on each of those sales. So the quantity, basically, to me, it gives you everything from a sales perspective that you may want to look at. So that's why I love this particular report. And in Excel, to make a pivot table, it's actually very, very easy. You're simply clicking within your data set, and you're basically inserting a pivot table. And it'll ask you, do you want to insert it in the same worksheet or another one? I always choose another one. And one of the good things about pivot tables is that if you want to give some data to someone to work on, you can actually put a password on the actual data so they can't change any of the data. And then you give it to them and they can work in this multiple ways, but they can't mess up the original data. So how many people here use pivot tables? Okay, we've got 1, 2. Okay, so we've got maybe 4 or 5 people here who are using pivot tables. I love them now that I've learned how to use them because they are foolproof. So a pivot table is simply a way of slicing and dicing the information that was available on the original table. So for instance, if I click customer name, it puts all my customers along the left here. And you can see over in this side, you've got columns, things you might want to go across the columns, rows, and then you've got values, which is the information that you want showing. So let's just say that I want to produce a report that shows my sales by month for this time period. So I might say, put the date across the columns. And what do I want to see? I could choose the quantity, which would be the count of what I've sold them. I don't know how interesting that is. Like, I've sold them 20 items. That might not be very valuable. But the amount, and that's why it's important to know what these columns back here relate to. In this case, amount basically means what was the total sales of that line item. So amount is the thing I want to look at. So what you do is you just grab the amount with your cursor, bring it down here into values. So now, for this customer, for this date, this is how much I sold them, the total invoice amount. Now, I don't want to see every date, so you just right-click on the date and you group it. And in this case, you have options to group it by quarter, by year. So I'm going to just keep it by month. So now I've got my sales to this customer, total invoice sales for each month for these customers. And so this is why and you can nest things. So if you said, okay, well, I want to see the items for each customer. So I drag that down into the rows, and now it's nesting, and it's showing me here's the customer, and here's all the items that made up those sales amounts. So basically, you've just run a customer item profitability report based on that raw data just by doing this. But you could flip it the other way and run it by item. If you said, okay, I want the item to be first, and I just moved it up. Now show me all my items and the customers, the multiple customers that I sold them to. So you can see that without messing up the data, you're able to get a lot of powerful information. And if you said, okay, well, this is showing me in the amount column here, sum of amount, but maybe I want to see the count. We talked about whether that's useful or not, but this is how many, I think it would be how many invoices? How many invoices I shipped to them. So it's a way of slicing and dicing all of this without having to rerun reports. And if you ran, we can make reports for you that are specific for slicing and dicing, or, you can find existing reports, or you can use the flexible report writer to make your own column type reports that go to Excel. So you've got 3 different options for how you get the information out of your system. So let's say I no longer want to, I just take, I take customer name. Now I'm just looking at the items, but count of amount is kind of silly, so I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to say, show me the sum. You could look at the average, you could look at the min, you could look at the max. You can say, show me, and just by filtering, basically, there's, where is it, field settings, filter. I mean, I haven't even explored all the options, and the one thing is that I'm not a very advanced, necessarily, Excel user on a regular basis. This is very easy to do. I actually learned about it had to do it in my MBA program, and when I first did it, I was like, oh my God, I love pivot tables. They're so great. So if it's something you haven't tried before, I certainly encourage you, because the other thing you can do, you go back to your original data, and there's not just pivot tables, but you can insert a pivot chart. And so you can create charts, and it gives you a little bit. It now has axis fields instead of just the column type fields. You can change the type of the chart and say, okay, well, show it to me in a pie graph, and maybe I want to see the customer names over here, and let's say the amount that I sold them on the value section. So here's my customer in a more visual way, and of course I have to make it huge to get that long list of legend of companies. I'm only at the F's, so I need to make it really large to see all of my legend. But it just shows you that you can really very quickly get this kind of charts, and sometimes people are more visual in how they like to see information, so it's a great tool for that. Does anybody have any questions about how are you, those who have put their hands up, how are you using pivot tables in your business right now? Any?
Sales history.
Sales history, okay. Sorry? Margin, okay. Costs, okay. I know I had one customer who took the course and went home and sent me back a pivot table picture, a chart of his inventory in his different warehouses, because they used a lot of outside warehouses, and he just loved that one. So it can be almost anything you can put your mind to. If you just get the raw data out of Minotaur, creating a pivot table to express that visually is actually very simple. And the beautiful thing is there's nothing I can do to mess this up. So, if I just throw something in here and it makes no sense whatsoever, well, okay, I've got like blank, or I don't know what I have now. You just start over, or just, completely just say, okay, I'm just going to delete that particular sheet, and we're just going to pretend I never did that. So, by having the data, it's just a matter of how you're looking at the data. It could be inventory information, it could be sales information, costs, these different ways that people have used these. It's just that it's a point in time. Whatever time you brought that data over, that's what the data is. And you will find in my little step-by-step guide there that one of the exercises that I take you through is how to replace the data with more current data without having to redo your pivot table. Because perhaps, like, one of the beautiful things about the pivot tables is maybe now you want to say, okay, I want to go to the design. Now pick me, you know, something that looks really nice like this, and I want to have banded rows, and I want to, and you might get it all set up with your highlighting and your titles, everything the way you want, but now you need to add a month. So the reason that you don't just run that month in Minotaur and add it onto the bottom is because of our abilities to allow you to edit information. So if you were to just add on November's information to October, what if somebody went back and edited something in October? Now you're thinking, well, my total doesn't match. Well, no, your total doesn't match because something earlier on. So I always recommend rerunning the report and replacing the entire data set unless you have really strict controls about historical editing of information. So does anybody have any questions? I hope you see that, like, it's pretty easy to do. So I hope that you take advantage and try some of this stuff. It's a great way of producing a very visually appealing report in any which way you want to do it. But giving it to each salesman to examine their own data is sometimes very valuable. They can look it up and say, oh, you know, if you give them a long history, it can be very interesting.